In a small village, a cat named Whiskers discovered a magic fish in a pond. The fish promised 3 wishes in exchange for its freedom. Whiskers wished for endless fish, a cozy bed, and a bell that rang softly. The fish granted all 3 wishes and swam away, leaving Whiskers content and purring in the sun. Jonathan Hayes was a man everyone in the city knew. He was a millionaire, the owner of several companies, and he lived in a mansion of glass and stone on top of a hill. From the outside, people thought he had it all: money, power, cars, servants, and endless luxuries. But what no one could see was the emptiness that lived inside him. Jonathan was a man who trusted no one, who spoke little, and who believed money could solve every problem. His heart was quiet, but it was a cold kind of quiet, the type that came from years of loneliness and broken trust. Every morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, the front door of his mansion opened quietly. A woman named Angela Carter walked in, with her cleaning supplies. She moved carefully, her footsteps soft on the marble floors, as if she didn't want to disturb the silence that wrapped around Jonathan's life. Angela had been cleaning his house for over a year, and in all that time Jonathan had barely spoken more than a few words to her. To him, Angela was just part of the background, like the paintings on the wall or the furniture in the hall. She scrubbed, dusted, polished, and left without complaint. He never asked her about her life, and she never shared it. It was easier that way, for both of them. But what Jonathan didn't know was that Angela's silence hid a world of struggles and sacrifices. She was not just a cleaning lady. She was a mother, a single mother raising her daughter all alone. And that daughter was her reason to wake up every morning, her reason to work, and her reason to keep going when life got hard. Her daughter's name was Maya. She was 8 years old, with eyes full of innocence and a smile that could melt the hardest heart. Maya had Down syndrome, and while that made life harder in some ways, Angela never saw her daughter as a burden. To her, Maya was a gift, the most precious part of her life. Angela worked in different homes and offices, cleaning, scrubbing, and washing so that she could afford Maya's food, school supplies, and medicine. She never complained, never let the world see her pain. But inside, her heart was heavy with worry every day. She worried about leaving Maya at home when she had to work long hours. She worried about the cruel words people sometimes said about her daughter, and she worried about how she would survive if she ever lost her job. Still, Angela carried herself with quiet strength. She smiled when people looked down on her, she bowed her head when they ignored her, and she kept working with dignity. Because she knew one thing: Maya needed her and nothing else mattered. Jonathan never noticed any of this. He never noticed the way Angela's hands shook with exhaustion sometimes, or the way her eyes looked tired but kind. He never noticed how she paused at the window before leaving, staring at the world outside as if she carried secrets no one cared to ask about. To Jonathan, she was simply the cleaning lady. But fate has a strange way of opening people's eyes. And one stormy afternoon, when Jonathan returned home earlier than expected, that quiet wall between their worlds would begin to crack. Because for the first time, he was about to see who Angela truly was. Not just a worker, but a mother protecting her child. And nothing in Jonathan's life would ever be the same again. It was a rainy afternoon. Dark clouds hung low over the city, and thunder rolled in the distance. Jonathan Hayes had returned home earlier than usual. His business trip had ended badly, and his mood was sharp like broken glass. All he wanted was silence, his usual cold silence where no one dared to disturb him. As he walked through the wide hall of his mansion, he heard something unusual, the soft sound of laughter. It wasn't the polite laugh of a guest or the forced laugh of a servant. It was pure, childlike laughter, bubbling and free, echoing off the marble floors. Jonathan stopped, his brow furrowed. He never allowed children in his house. He hated noise, hated mess, hated the unpredictable energy children carried. Yet here it was, right in the middle of his perfect silence. He followed the sound carefully, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor. As he reached the back corridor near the study, he froze. There, Sitting cross-legged on the polished floor was a small girl. She was drawing with crayons on a piece of scrap paper, her tiny hands moving quickly as she filled the page with bright colors. Beside her was Angela, kneeling protectively, her arms half wrapped around the girl as if shielding her from the world. Jonathan's voice cut the air. "Who is this child?" Angela's head snapped up, fear flashing in her eyes. Her heart raced, and for a moment she could not speak. She pulled her daughter close, her body stiff with worry. "This is my daughter, Mr. Hayes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Her name is Maya." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "And why is she in my house?" His tone was harsh, almost like a blade. Angela swallowed hard. "I had no choice. She is sick today. I couldn't leave her alone at home. Please understand." Jonathan stared at her, his chest tightening, though he didn't know why. He wanted to stay angry, to remind her of the rules. His house was not a playground. It was not a shelter. It was a place of order, quiet, and control. But then his eyes fell on Maya. The girl looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. There was no fear in them, only curiosity. Her lips curved into a small, trusting smile, and without hesitation, she lifted the paper she had been drawing on. "It's for you," she said softly, her voice clear and gentle. Jonathan blinked. On the paper was a simple drawing, a big house with windows, a bright yellow sun in the corner, and a woman holding the hand of a little girl. The lines were uneven, the colors spilling over, but there was something pure in it, something that touched him in a way he couldn't explain. Angela quickly lowered her daughter's hand. "Maya, don't," she whispered, ashamed and nervous. But Jonathan didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the drawing, his throat tight. He wanted to speak, but no words came out. Finally, he turned his gaze back to Angela. His voice was colder than he intended. "This is not a daycare, Angela. You are here to clean, nothing more." Angela's lips trembled. She lowered her head, tears forming in her eyes, but she did not argue. She only held her daughter tighter, as if protecting her from his anger. "I understand, sir," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disrespect your home, but she's my daughter. I had nowhere else to take her." The silence that followed was heavy. Jonathan wanted to walk away, to end the conversation, to put his walls back up. But something deep inside of him, something long buried, stirred uncomfortably. He clenched his fists and turned sharply, leaving the corridor. But the image of the child's smile and the drawing in her tiny hands followed him like a shadow. And though he didn't want to admit it, Jonathan Hayes was shaken. Jonathan sat in his study, staring at the glass of whiskey on his desk. The storm outside rumbled, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside his chest. He kept seeing that little girl's face, her smile so pure, her eyes so trusting. He tried to push the image away, but it clung to him like a shadow he couldn't escape. Moments later, Angela knocked softly on the door. Her head was bowed, her hands twisting nervously. Maya was asleep on a small couch in the corner, wrapped in Angela's shawl. "Mr. Hayes," Angela began quietly, "I want to apologize again. I never meant to break your rules. Maya wasn't feeling well and I couldn't leave her alone. Please forgive me, it won't happen again." Jonathan looked up, his face stern. "Angela, this is not acceptable. You work here to clean, not to bring your personal problems into my house." The words were sharp, each one cutting deep into Angela's heart. She held her breath, trying to stay strong, but her eyes betrayed her pain. "She is not a problem," Angela whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "She's my daughter. She's my everything." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "I didn't hire you to babysit your child here. I pay you to keep this place in order. If you can't do that, maybe you should reconsider this job." Angela's chest ached. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, but her pride wouldn't let her break down in front of him. With a heavy heart, she lowered her gaze and whispered, "I understand, sir." But Jonathan did not understand. Not yet. At that moment, Maya stirred in her sleep and let out a small cough. Angela rushed to her side, kneeling quickly and rubbing her daughter's back with gentle circles. Her eyes filled with worry, her hands trembling as she whispered softly, "It's all right, baby. Mommy's here. You're safe." Jonathan watched, silently. For the first time, he noticed something he had ignored for months. The way Angela's body bent protectively over her daughter, the way her face softened with pure love, the way her tired hands found strength in comforting her child. It was not the posture of a servant. It was the posture of a mother who would give everything she had, even her life, to protect her child. Jonathan's throat tightened, but he forced himself to stay cold. "Angela," he said finally, his tone clipped. "This house is not a place for children. Tomorrow find another arrangement, do you understand?" Angela closed her eyes. She wanted to beg, to tell him how hard it was, how every penny she earned went into keeping Maya alive and cared for, but she swallowed her words. She had been treated like this before by other employers, by strangers on the street, by a world that saw her and her daughter as less. "Yes, sir," she whispered. Jonathan turned his gaze back to the window, but he could not ignore the sound of Maya's soft breathing as she slept peacefully in her mother's arms. He could not ignore the warmth in Angela's eyes, a warmth he had never seen in his own mother when he was a child. For a long moment, silence filled the room, and deep inside, though he refused to admit it, Jonathan Hayes felt something he hadn't felt in years: guilt. The next evening, Jonathan returned home later than usual. His mind was heavy with business deals, contracts, and meetings that drained him of all energy. Yet as he walked through his grand, silent house, he heard a faint sound that pulled his attention away from everything else. It was coughing, small, weak coughs echoing from the living room. Jonathan followed the sound and found Angela sitting on the couch, holding her daughter in her arms. Maya's face was pale, her little body shaking with every breath. Angela rocked her gently, whispering soothing words as if each syllable carried healing. "You're okay, my love," Angela murmured. "Mommy's here, just breathe, Mommy won't leave you." Jonathan froze at the doorway. He could have turned around, pretended he didn't see, but something in the scene rooted him to the ground. For the first time, he was not looking at a cleaning lady. He was looking at a mother fighting silently against the world, guarding her child with nothing but love. Angela looked up suddenly, noticing him there. Fear crossed her face and she quickly wiped her tears. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes," she whispered. "She was too weak today. I couldn't leave her at home. I'll take her away if you want." Jonathan said nothing for a moment. His throat was tight. He wanted to be cold, to remind her of the rules, but the words refused to come. He only managed to step closer and glance at Maya, who clung weakly to her mother's chest. "Is she all right?" Jonathan asked, his voice lower than usual. Angela nodded, though her eyes were worried. "She has trouble sometimes. It's part of her condition. But I know how to take care of her. I can't always do it alone." Her voice cracked on the last word and she quickly looked down, ashamed to show her weakness. Jonathan studied her carefully. He had always thought of himself as strong because of his money, his power, his control. But now he saw a different kind of strength. The kind that came from sacrifice, from love, from giving without expecting anything in return. He didn't know why, but it shook him deeply. "I told you before," Jonathan said slowly, forcing his tone to stay firm. "This house is not a place for children." Angela pressed her lips together. She didn't argue, but her hands tightened protectively around Maya. Her silence was not weakness, it was defiance. The defiance of a mother who would rather suffer quietly than give up her child. Jonathan turned away, frustrated with himself. "You can't keep bringing her here," he said again. Angela lowered her head. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I know, sir, but I don't have a choice. If I lose this job, I don't know how we'll survive. Every floor I scrub, every corner. I clean and it's all for her. She is my life. Without her, I am nothing. Without this job, we are nothing." The words cut through Jonathan like a blade. He wanted to harden his heart, to walk away, to keep his distance as he always had. but for the first time in years he couldn't. He looked at Maya again. Her tiny face rested against her mother's chest, safe and trusting, even in sickness. And in that moment, Jonathan Hayes, the man who thought he had everything, realized he was looking at something he had never truly known: unconditional love. And though he tried to bury the feeling, he could not deny it anymore. Something inside him had begun to change. The next morning, Jonathan walked into the dining hall with his usual stiffness. His breakfast was already prepared, the table shining as always. But his eyes did not go to the silver plates or the expensive food. They went to the small figure sitting quietly on the floor near the window. It was Maya. She was drawing again, her crayons scattered on a sheet of paper. Angela was dusting nearby, keeping a watchful eye on her daughter. Jonathan's instinct was to frown, to remind Angela of his rules. But he stopped himself. Instead, he walked closer, curious. "What are you drawing?" Jonathan asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Maya looked up, her eyes brightening instantly. She held up her paper proudly. On it was a picture of 3 figures, a woman, a child, and a tall man standing beside them. Above them was a huge red heart. Jonathan's breath caught. "And who is that man?" he asked quietly. Maya giggled and pointed at him. "You. You're grumpy, but Mommy says grumpy people need hugs too." Angela's face turned red. "Maya," she whispered, embarrassed. "Don't say such things." But Jonathan didn't scold. He didn't even frown. He just stood there, stunned. For years, he had been called powerful, rich, intimidating. But never had a child looked at him with such innocent acceptance. Never had anyone drawn him inside a heart. He felt his chest tighten in a way he couldn't explain. A strange warmth pressed against the walls he had built inside himself. Jonathan crouched down slowly, something he had never done for anyone before. He studied the drawing again. The lines were shaky, the colors outside the boxes, but it was filled with something pure. Hope. "Why did you put me here?" he asked softly. "Because you're not alone," Maya said simply, as if it was the most obvious truth in the world. "Everyone needs family." Angela's eyes glistened with tears. She tried to interrupt, to change the subject, but Jonathan lifted his hand slightly. He couldn't stop listening. For years, Jonathan had believed family was nothing but pain. His own childhood had been filled with distance and coldness. His father never hugged him, never told him he was proud. His mother cared more for appearances than love. Somewhere along the way, Jonathan had stopped expecting warmth from anyone. He had replaced it with money, control, and silence. But now this little girl, a stranger, a child who owed him nothing, had drawn him inside her family, inside her heart, without hesitation. Jonathan swallowed hard. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. You really think I belong there?" Maya nodded, smiling brightly. "Yes. Even grumpy people can smile. You just forgot how." Angela's hands trembled as she picked up a cloth, pretending to dust. But her tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She had never seen anyone reach into Jonathan Hayes's heart like this, not in all the months she had worked there. Jonathan stood up slowly, his throat tight. He didn't know how to respond. He only knew one thing. Maya's innocent words had pierced through his walls, through his coldness, and left a crack he couldn't ignore. For the rest of the day, Jonathan found himself distracted. He sat in meetings but heard Maya's words in his mind. Everyone needs family. He looked at his phone, but instead of thinking of profits, he thought of that shaky drawing with a heart around him. For the first time in years, Jonathan Hayes felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not control, but a longing he didn't even know existed. The walls around his heart were starting to break. That evening, Jonathan sat in his grand study, the room filled with silence except for the ticking of the old clock. Usually, silence was his comfort, But now it felt heavy, almost unbearable. His mind kept wandering back to the little girl's drawing, to her innocent voice saying, "Even grumpy people can smile." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, feeling emotions he hadn't let himself feel in years. For the first time, he wondered if perhaps he wasn't as strong as he thought. Maybe he was just lonely. Down the hall, soft footsteps echoed. Jonathan stood and walked quietly, curious. He found Angela in the kitchen, washing dishes. Her hands moved, slowly, tired from the long day. Maya sat at the table, humming softly as she colored in another piece of paper. For a long moment, Jonathan just watched. The scene was so simple, so ordinary, yet there was a kind of warmth in it that his mansion had never known. Finally, he cleared his throat. Angela jumped, startled, then quickly lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes, I was just finishing up. We'll leave soon." But Jonathan shook his head. His voice was softer than she had ever heard. "Sit down, Angela. I want to talk." Angela hesitated, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. She sat down at the edge of the chair, her posture stiff, her eyes full of worry. Jonathan studied her for a moment before speaking. "Angela, I was wrong." Her head lifted slightly, surprise flashing across her tired face. "I didn't see you," Jonathan continued, his tone quiet but sincere. "I didn't see your daughter. To me, you were just someone who worked here, but today, I realized something. You're not just a cleaning lady. You're a mother, a strong one, and she—" He glanced at Maya. "She's a light I didn't even know I needed." Angela's eyes filled with tears. For so long, people had looked at her and seen only her job, never her heart. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Mr. Hayes, you don't need to say that. I know what I am. I know how the world sees me." Jonathan shook his head firmly. "No, that's not what I see anymore." He paused, his throat tight, then added, "When I look at you with her, I see something money can't buy. I see love, real love, the kind I never had." Angela's lips parted, but she couldn't find the words. She only stared at him, her heart pounding. Maya, innocent and unaware of the heaviness in the room, held up her paper again. "Look, Mr. Hayes, I drew us all having dinner together." Jonathan leaned down to look. On the page was a table with 3 stick figures sitting around it, a woman, a child, and a man with broad shoulders. Above them were little stars and another big heart. Jonathan's eyes burned as he looked at the drawing. He had never imagined himself inside a family picture. Yet here, in a child's innocent world, he belonged without question. Slowly, Jonathan sat back and whispered, "Maybe we could make that picture real one day." Angela gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hand. She didn't know if he meant it, but the look in his eyes told her it was no empty promise. For the first time in his life, Jonathan Hayes wasn't just offering money. He was offering something far greater, his heart. And in that moment, Angela realized that this man, who once seemed so cold, was learning what it meant to be human again. The days that followed were unlike anything Jonathan Hayes had ever known. His mansion, once silent and cold, now carried the sound of gentle laughter and soft conversations. Maya's crayons left trails of color on the kitchen table, her drawings taped proudly to the refrigerator, and Angela's presence no longer blended into the background. She was no longer just the cleaning lady. She was the heart that gave life to the empty house. Jonathan found himself changing in ways he never thought possible. In the mornings, he would sit at the table with his coffee and quietly watch Maya color. Sometimes she would slide a paper toward him and ask, "Draw with me." At first, his lines were stiff and awkward, but slowly his drawings grew softer. The child's joy was contagious, breaking down walls he had spent years building. One evening, Angela stayed behind to finish cleaning the library. Jonathan walked in and found her staring at a photo on the shelf, an old picture of his parents. Her eyes were full of quiet sadness, as if she could see the loneliness hidden behind the frame. "You must have missed love growing up," Angela said softly, not daring to look at him. Jonathan swallowed, his chest heavy. I didn't just miss it, I never knew it. His voice cracked, surprising even himself. Money filled the house, but love, it was never there. Angela turned to him, her eyes warm but heavy with understanding. That's why Maya's smile touched you, because it's the kind of love no one can buy. Her words pierced his heart. For years he had believed nothing could reach him, yet here she was, a woman the world overlooked, showing him the truth he had been blind to. That night, when Maya hugged him goodnight and whispered, "You're not grumpy anymore," Jonathan felt something inside him break. He hugged, her back tightly, tears filling his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't just holding a child. He was holding family. Days turned into weeks, and the changes deepened. Jonathan arranged for Maya's medical care, paying for her treatments and ensuring she had everything she needed. He set up a small art room for her, with shelves of crayons, papers, and paints. Maya's laughter filled the mansion, and even the servants began to smile more often. The once empty house finally felt alive. But Jonathan's greatest change wasn't in his money or the gifts he gave. It was in the way he looked at Angela. He no longer saw her as a worker. He saw her as a woman of strength, a mother of endless love, and the reason his heart had learned to feel again. One evening, as the sun set behind the tall glass windows, Jonathan stood in the garden with Angela by his side. Maya was running across the grass, holding her drawings high, her laughter echoing in the air. Jonathan turned to Angela, his voice low but full of truth. "You saved me, Angela. I thought I had everything, but I had nothing until I saw the way. You loved her. You taught me that real wealth isn't money, it's family." Angela's eyes filled with tears. For so long, she had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. But now, for the first time, she didn't feel alone. Jonathan reached for her hand, not as a master to a servant, but as a man who had finally found his home. And as Maya ran toward them, hugging them both with her tiny arms, Jonathan Hayes realized something he never thought possible. He was no longer just a millionaire, he was something richer. He was loved.